Thanks, you guys, for coming back to the Soil Matters. Dr. Gerald Pollack, thank you so much for coming, my friend. You are an
It's my
amazing
pleasure.
man with amazing knowledge. I'm going to jump off and let the host take over. So have a great show.
Well, sir, it is a true honor. I've been a big fan of your work for years, although I have lost track of where you're at this point. Kind of gone off some deep ends myself into soil biology, chemistry, and just trying to keep up with the interactions it's been a challenge to say the least. But still, it's an absolute honor to have you here today. And I'd love to have you just first explain how you got on to this or how you started the work, and then kind of bring us up to speed as to where you are now.
Okay, how did I start? Well, I've not been studying water for my entire career. I was actually studying muscle contraction at the molecular level, how the muscle proteins, mostly actin and myosin, how they interact with one another to produce force. There was a theory. This theory still exists, put forth by a distinguished and famous Nobel laureate whose name was Sir Andrew Huxley. And Huxley was a famous guy. He was a member of the Huxley family. He won a Nobel Prize for earlier work. He was knighted by the Queen, Sir Andrew Huxley. He was president of the Royal Society. He was master of Trinity College, Cambridge. And when he walked into the room, there was a hush. It was as though God walked in, and so everybody pay attention. And we had evidence that his theory was bankrupt. It didn't make any sense at all. Didn't fit the evidence. We had a lot of evidence that it didn't work, and mostly I came to realize that not only his theory but other viewpoints made the presumption that all of those proteins inside muscle were operating in a vacuum. Water was nowhere to be found. You'd never find any mention of water in any theory of muscle contraction, and that seemed absurd because because a muscle is mostly water. It's roughly like other organs in the body, roughly 2/3 water. And if you translate that into the number or the fraction of molecules, in other words, if you take the muscle and line up all the proteins or line up all the molecules and start counting, more than 99 out of 100 are going to be water molecules, because the water molecule is so small. And if you think of how many you need to make up that 2/3 volume, it's a lot of water molecules. So it seemed preposterous that the most prevalent molecule sitting inside the muscle, there was a pretense as though it doesn't exist. Doesn't make sense, right? So at the same time that I began thinking in that realm, I got an invitation to go to a conference, and the conference was to commemorate the life of a guy named Ernst. Ernst was a well-recognized biophysicist, a Hungarian guy, and he'd passed a couple of years before that, and the idea was to have a symposium in his honor. So there were people who represented each one of his two areas of expertise. One was muscle, one was water. So I was the one who was invited to present on water, and of course I presented on water, and I think the reception was okay. But after me came presentations on water, and the main presenter was a guy named Gilbert Ling. I'd heard of Gilbert Ling before, but not very much. Anyway, Gilbert presented his ideas, and his idea was that inside the cell be it animal cells or plant cells or whatever cells you like. The water was not liquid water. It's not the stuff that I have here. It actually, he said that, and presented evidence, of course, that the water molecules were lined up like soldiers at attention. Now, in liquid water, that's not the case. At least as people understand liquid water, the molecules are randomly oriented and they're bouncing around a fierce number of times each second or millisecond or even femtosecond. So this is directly at odds with the current view of how cells work, because the current view that you read in any textbook is that it's liquid water that's inside your cells. And if it's liquid water, you begin to build on the concept that all of the solids inside the cell, which are doing the work of the cell, and at least in theory, they can move around freely. But in this kind of water, they can't. This is sort of like a crystal that exists inside. And it was not only Gilbert Ling who made his presentation, but perhaps a dozen or so people who had evidence to support the point of view of Gilbert Ling. I was really impressed. I thought, my goodness, if this is right, everything else is wrong. Basically, all of biology, everything we learn, everything in the cell biology book or biochemistry book, it can't be if this is right. So naturally, it you got my attention, and lots of things capture my attention. I don't always have confidence that I'm intrigued by what should intrigue me, and so I took one of his books. By that time, I think he published 3 or 4 books. By that time, I think 6 or 7 before he passed at age 100 a year or 2 ago. And I gave it to some of my students to look at, some of the students who I know might be involved. And the feedback was the same from all of them. This is so important, they said, and it looks like he's got quite a bit of evidence that, he might actually be right. And so gaining support from my students and such, I felt I was on a good course, and I scratched my head. That's why I'm missing a lot of hair. I said to myself, what can I do? What can I do? To explore this. Ling was not a popular guy. He was on the fringe, and people on the fringe don't really get a whole lot of acceptance. They get derision mostly, and that was the case for Gilbert. So what I decided to do first is write a book. Why would I write a book? Gilbert Ling already wrote 3 or 4 books on this stuff, presenting massive amounts of evidence. And the reason I thought I'd write a book is that Gilbert's writing is not easily penetrable. You might say it's virtually impenetrable. If you have expertise in all the areas he's talking about, you can read through quite readily, I suppose. I don't have expertise in all those areas. But if you don't, it's a real challenge. And I found out that Gilbert Ling, the genius that he was, he'd sit down at the typewriter or the word processor, and he'd bat something out and he'd send it off to the publisher. The word editing seemed to be like a foreign language to him. He never heard the word editing. Why would he want to edit? It just so I decided that what I'm going to do is to write a book that describes the ideas of Gilbert Ling in a way that perhaps is understandable, because it's so important. People need to know about it. They shouldn't be struggling their way through. They should be able to read. If the ideas make sense, it should be easy to expose in a way that's understandable.